Nobody wants to end up an NFL bust. No one wants to have the expectations of a franchise placed on their shoulders just to end up disappointing your fans and becoming the laughingstock of the league. Yet every year there are more players that are chosen in the draft that will end up a disappointment than a massive star. Sometimes players bust because they simply don't have the skill level to compete in the NFL. But sometimes the failure is purely because of ego, lack of awareness, and a serious lack of dedication. Jamarcus Russell, the first overall pick of the 2007 NFL Draft, is considered by many to be the biggest draft bust in NFL history. He's one of those players that had natural football talent, but just couldn't manage to get out of his own way. Despite being the first overall pick to a franchise desperate for a quarterback, he ended up spending just 3 years in the NFL before being shunned forever. But what exactly happened that made Jamarcus Russell such an inexcusable draft bust? Today on FootballLore, we explore the disappointing career of Jamarcus Russell and break down just what caused him to be such a disappointment. We all know he had a disappointing NFL career, but in order to get a better understanding of Jamarcus Russell, we need to go back to his origins and childhood. Jamarcus Russell was born in Mobile, Alabama, and became a solid athlete from a young age. He was naturally gifted as a quarterback. He wasn't the type that had to work hard to develop arm strength or an ability to make solid throws. Instead, it was something that came rather natural to him. Even as a freshman, he was able to be the starting quarterback for his varsity squad and take them all the way to the state championship game. Obviously, this is a testament to his natural football ability, but it also was the start of a weaker work ethic than what is usually seen in the NFL. Most players who reach the league are forced to spend endless hours studying their playbook, game film, working on their mechanics, and through this effort are given a shot at the league. Jamarcus from an early age had an opposite experience. It didn't really matter how much time he spent studying the playbook or working on his throws because he was just more naturally talented than almost everyone in his state. By his sophomore high school season, he had become a 6'3" behemoth that continued to dominate the competition. He took his team all the way to the state semifinals, and with 2 great seasons under his belt, he started to attract the attention of several great college programs. He had offers from LSU, Florida State University, and several other smaller schools by the time he was a senior in high school. This further reinforced his opinion that he didn't really need to work as hard as some other prospects. He had been pretty much coasting on his natural ability through his whole career, and it had taken him to receiving multiple D1 offers most players would kill for. His senior year of high school was also his statistically best season. He threw for over 3,000 yards and 22 touchdowns. Over his high school career, he managed to break the Alabama high school passing yard record, which actually is still held by him to this day. He committed to LSU in 2003 and was redshirted his freshman year in order to give him more time to develop and not waste a year of eligibility while the Tigers still had a starting quarterback. Started to have scouts showing up just to get a glimpse of his cannon arm and see his natural ability to make plays out of nothing. The problem with any star athlete in college is that they tend to get the Roman Emperor treatment. They don't really need to do any classwork. They don't really need to spend a ton of time practicing. As long as they show up and do their job, they are given privileges at the institution most normal players don't get. This was not something that would end up benefiting Jamarcus at all, and instead would set the stage for him to be one of the laziest prospects in history. At this point, many scouts were clamoring that he was one of the most naturally talented quarterbacks in history and his draft stock was at its peak. I do want to give Jamarcus some credit here. The guy was so insanely naturally talented that despite his off-the-field issues, he was still able to go out and dominate the SEC every week. That it came time for him to even further showcase his skills during his pro day. He blew everyone away. Jamarcus had such an incredible arm in college that he was able to throw 60-yard passes from his knees at his pro day. That level of arm strength obviously had most NFL scouts drooling thinking about what he would be able to turn into. As great as Jamarcus Russell was coming into the draft, it wasn't like there were red flags that this wouldn't work out. The Wonderlic exam is a test that is supposed to measure a player's intelligence, and a perfect score would be about 50 points. Jamarcus was able to score a 24 on the test, which isn't bad, but the average starting quarterback usually tests at about 27. He may have had the arm of someone who could be in the Hall of Fame, but that was the first sign something may be wrong in the NFL. Another issue with Jamarcus was his tendency to abuse substances off the field, thinking it wouldn't affect his play. It came out several years after he was picked that he had tested positive for codeine syrup before being picked with the first overall pick. It is interesting that despite a failed drug test and a low Wonderlic score, that he still ended up being the first overall pick. I think a lot of this is due to the sheer amount of hype Jamarcus had received before the draft. I am going to read a few quotes now about what people were saying heading into the 2007 draft about this prospect. Todd McShay of ESPN had called him the most impressive college quarterback he had ever seen and claimed that the Raiders would be gaining one of the most impressive passers of all time. Peter King of Sports Illustrated had said that Jamarcus Russell was a terrifying prospect that was going to transform the Raiders into a contender. While now it's easy to see that the off-the-field issues were clearly going to cause a problem, I do think the Raiders thought they were going to be able to get him under control. That doesn't mean, however, that the Raiders had reached a unanimous decision to draft Jamarcus with the first overall pick. As time has gone on, more and more leaks have come out about this period in Raiders history. Some of the coaching staff had thought he had come off aloof in interviews and thought he didn't have the work ethic to succeed at the next level. A few of the coaching staff had tried to lobby the team to instead draft wide receiver Calvin Johnson, who would go on to have a Hall of Fame career. Despite this, Al Davis, who had total control over personnel on the team, insisted on drafting Jamarcus with the first overall pick of the draft. Even Lane Kiffin, who was the head coach at the time, was against the pick due to the off-the-field issues. Despite this, the Raiders still chose him with the first overall pick in 2007. After being selected first overall, the conversation immediately shifted to the matter of signing Jamarcus to his rookie contract. Obviously, any athlete who makes the jump to the NFL has an obligation to secure the largest contract possible to secure their financial future. I am not going to sit here and give Jamarcus a hard time for trying to get the biggest payday he possibly could. However, I will say that missing most of the preseason and organized team activities to hold out as a rookie was not the wisest choice. Jamarcus was incredibly naturally talented, but as a rookie in the NFL, it is crucial to ensure you get the most reps you possibly can with the new level of defense. When Jamarcus decided to hold out to guarantee himself a larger contract, it may have been the right business decision, but he gave himself an up-road battle to success in the NFL. Jamarcus did end up receiving the largest rookie deal in history as a result of his holdout, but he wouldn't even end up playing out the entire deal due to his poor work ethic. At the end of the day, his holdout did end up securing him a $68 million deal with $31 million guaranteed, and he would need to be wise with his money to set himself up financially. Despite this monster deal and natural talent, the head coach of the Raiders wasn't even willing to name him the starting quarterback going into Week 1. The first signs of trouble in paradise came almost immediately. Jamarcus had been claiming to the coaching staff that he was studying the playbook for hours every night and watching film to help him develop. At first, the staff thought he was probably telling the truth, but after several weeks of messy practices and a lack of understanding, they decided to put it to the test. They gave Jamarcus several tapes to study and told him he had to finish an analysis that night. The only catch came with the fact the tapes were totally empty and had no film to analyze. Despite this, Jamarcus the next day claimed to have learned a lot from the tape to help him develop his game. At this point, the staff knew he was not watching the assigned tape or studying the playbook as intended. I am unsure as to why an NFL quarterback would go out of his way to not watch game tape or prepare for his opponents, but I do think it came down to the fact that Jamarcus Russell decided he was so naturally talented he didn't need to try in the NFL. He really thought he would be able to walk into a team and do exactly what he had done at LSU. But as we all know, the NFL is a totally different beast to college football. This action drastically reduced the amount of confidence the organization had in Jamarcus, and they decided to play with QB Josh McCown as the starter to open the season. It wasn't until December that Jamarcus would make his first professional appearance against the Broncos. This appearance wasn't horrible, but it definitely was not up to the level people were expecting from him. He ended up going 4 for 7 for just 56 yards and no scores. And while that may not be the worst scoreline possible, it definitely was not an elite performance. Things definitely did not improve before his second appearance, where he went 7 for 23 for just 89 yards, 1 touchdown, and 3 interceptions. This is obviously a terrible stat line, and he wouldn't improve through his entire rookie year. At the end of his first NFL season, he went just 36 for 66 and 373 yards, with 2 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Despite this insanely disappointing rookie season, Lane Kiffin still was forced to name him the starter for the upcoming season unless he failed to win the job in training camp. Jamarcus was able to secure the starting job going into his second season, and in the first game of the 2008 season, the Raiders would lose to the Broncos with a final score of 41-14. This was honestly one of the highlights of Jamarcus's career, with 180 yards and 2 touchdowns to no interceptions. That might sound like an Andy Dalton stat line, but it really was pretty much all that Jamarcus was capable of at the NFL level. At this point, it was clear to the Raiders that Jamarcus really wasn't putting in the effort he claimed to be off the field. At the end of his sophomore season in the NFL, he had a 53% completion percentage, 2,400 yards, and 13 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. Going into the 2009 season, Jamarcus had obviously re-earned his starting job for the Raiders, but wouldn't be able to hang on to his job through the entire season. By week 5, he had been put on the hot seat. In an appearance against the New York Giants, he lost 3 fumbles and managed to pass for only 100 yards. The next week, he lost another game to the Chiefs, and at that point, he was benched in favor of Bruce Gradkowski. The Raiders were so frustrated with his commitment to the game and performance that he even lost the backup role to Charlie Frye for most of the season. By the end of 2009, he had just 1,200 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. Amongst qualifying NFL quarterbacks, he had the lowest completion percentage, quarterback rating, touchdown passes, and fewest passing yards. Going into the 2010 offseason, things managed to get even worse when he showed up to training camp way overweight and out of shape. This, combined with his lack of commitment to the game, made it impossible for the Raiders to think he was going to pull it together, and the same month they would end up trading for Jason Campbell from the Commanders. This put 5 quarterbacks on the Raiders roster, and Jamarcus was told he had to compete to earn a roster spot. He was not able to compete with the other players, and the Raiders ended up releasing Russell in May of 2010. Some hoped this would serve as a wake-up call to Russell. If he really wanted to have a future in the NFL, it was crucial that he actually put in some effort. However, he just didn't have what it took to get back to an elite level. Shortly after being released, the Raiders filed a grievance against Russell, seeking to claw back some of the money they had paid out to him. They had given him about $10 million as an advance for the next 2 seasons, and now that he was cut, they wanted him to return it. This led to a dispute where Russell and his agent claimed that had been a part of his guaranteed money, and he countersued the team, claiming they actually owed him an additional $3 million. Russell would end up winning his suit in 2013, but some teams took this as a sign that taking a risk on Russell could come with serious conflicts in the legal department. This, combined with his notorious lack of work ethic, really made teams not want to take the risk. It didn't help that just a few months after this situation, he wound up getting arrested in his hometown for possession of codeine cough syrup. There had been rumors that the quarterback had been abusing the substance, but this confirmed what many had been suspecting. The reason he was caught was actually an accident. The police had been investigating a codeine ring, and it just so happened that Jamarcus Russell's name and address kept coming up in the investigation. This happening so shortly after he had been released absolutely put a stop to any teams who had been considering taking on the Jamarcus project. He did have 2 workouts with the Commanders and Dolphins, but both noted him being severely out of pro football shape. Initially, he had been working with former NBA coach John Lucas, but by 2011, Lucas had become frustrated with his lack of work ethic and cut ties with Russell. It was so bad that Lucas even asked him to move from the Houston area, and after this, he started to work out with Marshall Faulk, Jeff Garcia, and Otto Bolden. In 2013, it was found that he had managed to return to his rookie weight of 265 pounds, and this return to form was rewarded in the form of a tryout with the Chicago Bears. The Bears did not end up signing him after the workout, and Russell began to become desperate for another chance at the NFL. In 2016, he wrote an open letter to all 32 NFL teams asking to have a single year to prove himself. He even added the condition that he was willing to play for free. I think at this point, Jamarcus was starting to realize that he had blown one of the best opportunities any athlete could have. He had been given a chance to be the face of one of the most valuable NFL franchises and earned tens of millions of dollars while playing the game he loved. It obviously had been important to him in order for him to get back into shape and keep pursuing opportunities, but at this point, almost 10 years had passed since his rookie season, and the odds of a team wanting a 32-year-old project quarterback were extremely low. It is unfortunate to see someone squander such natural ability. He really could have been one of the most explosive quarterbacks ever. Someone of his height and 265 pounds is a behemoth, and his ability to move around the pocket combined with his cannon of an arm had tons of potential. He had made a ton of money off his deal with the Raiders, but he had tarnished the legacy of a great athlete in the process. After this, he kind of dropped off the radar for a little bit. There were memes about him being out of shape, and he quickly became known as one of the biggest draft busts ever. However, he was still involved in the game as a high school coach at his alma mater. He said he wanted to be able to contribute to young players' lives in the same way he had been influenced by the sport, which is an admirable goal, and in 2022 he released an op-ed where he talked about his life and career. I'm going to be honest, there are some good things in here, but a lot of it feels like cope. He talks about how he should have never even made it as far as he did, and how people from his neighborhood don't usually make it that far. And while I do commend people who can come from nothing to his level, I do think there are tons of NFL stars who have had equally hard childhoods and still managed to meet expectations in the league. I get it is probably hard to accept that you are the biggest bust in NFL history, but a lot of this article seems to make excuses for his lack of commitment to the game and poor performances. It doesn't seem like he really wants to take accountability for the way his career went. At the end of the day, he could have watched film, he could have stayed in shape, and he could have cared. But he didn't. I do want to give him credit for raising his family out of extreme poverty. That is something extremely commendable. However, I think we all know he could have done a lot more to give himself a good career. As much as he wants to explain himself, the example of the Raiders giving him blank game tapes and him still pretending to watch them is exactly the type of behavior that doesn't fly on the next level. I really think in his mind he thought he was going to just stroll into the NFL and be able to light the field on fire with his natural talent. That is the thing that tends to destroy draft busts the most, their own ego. The NFL is faster, harder hitting, and much more unforgiving than the college level. No matter how great you were in college, this next level takes a lot more effort. Usually at this point, the player just kind of fades into obscurity, every now and then being discussed as a large draft bust. However, it seems like there is a chance that Jamarcus has still continued his path of bad decision making. Everything we are about to discuss at this point are allegations, and there is a current lawsuit making its way through the courts to find out the truth. However, as of today, there are serious accusations that Jamarcus Russell embezzled tens of thousands of dollars from his own high school football team, which if true would be outrageous considering he was paid nearly $40 million over his NFL career. These accusations first appeared in fall of 2023 when he was fired from his coaching role at Williamson High School. Reports say this was not in any way a mutual decision. In fact, Jamarcus was apparently quite upset by the team separating from him. In the days after, it was revealed that the reason for this firing was that the school believes that Jamarcus stole a $74,000 donation check that was intended to be given to the team for new equipment. These allegations claim that he deposited the check into his own personal account instead of handing it over to the team. Apparently, after depositing the check, he then withdrew over $55,000 to spend on himself. The school obviously parted ways with him after and has him banned from campus entirely as a result of their investigation. He even tried to come to a team exercise in June and was turned away due to this. The case is currently set to go to trial in October of this year, and we await to see exactly what the truth is in this ordeal. I will say, if this ends up being true, then this has to be one of the stupidest ways I have seen someone even further tarnish their legacy. Allegedly stealing donations from your own high school football team while being worth tens of millions of dollars is simply selfish. I understand that most NFL players end up blowing through their wealth, and maybe that is the case for Jamarcus. Either way, I think that intercepting a check meant for underprivileged children has to be one of the worst things you could possibly do. Even in his own article, he talks about how the area he grows up in doesn't have a lot to keep kids out of trouble. Here, he was allegedly helping them develop into young men who can contribute to their community while apparently stealing right out from under them. It would be wrong no matter what high school it was, but it makes it especially bad because he knows how hard this community is struggling. The donor who initially gave Jamarcus the check was tipped off when Russell failed to give the donor a receipt of donation. This is what would have allowed the businessman to write off the donation on his taxes. Once Jamarcus failed to provide the receipt despite depositing the check, obviously the donor began to ask questions. Jamarcus decided to just stop replying to all communication at that point, and the donor requested that the check be reversed. Jamarcus has claimed that he has committed no wrongdoing and is countersuing the business owner for putting a stop order on the check. He also has bragged several times about being worth millions and simply never needing to work again. I just know that the trial is going to have a ton more information, and until the trial comes to a close, we have to remember that he is innocent until proven guilty. I do think if he ends up being found guilty, then his legacy will be even more tarnished than it already is as the biggest draft bust in NFL history. I sincerely hope this is a big misunderstanding and that Jamarcus isn't guilty of what he is accused of. It would really suck if he was willing to screw over his own football team. Overall, Jamarcus Russell leaves a legacy of an incredibly naturally talented football prospect that was never able to actually commit to putting in the work to become what he could have been. There is no way of ever knowing what could have been when it comes to his career, but it seems like even to this day he doesn't really want to admit that he is the reason his career had such difficulty. It is always sad to make these videos and realize some people are never going to be capable of getting out of their own way and reaching their full potential. He will always be remembered as arguably the biggest draft bust in NFL history, something I don't think anyone wants to be remembered by. I do think the Raiders were set back at least 5 years over this entire debacle, and some fans claim they have never really been able to recover from their pick. If you enjoyed this video, then I would really appreciate pressing the like button and leaving a comment down below. It helps the video perform much better in the algorithm, and we are trying to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. We post 3 football videos like this a week, and our last video was analyzing the terrible career of Trey Lance so far in the NFL. We will be posting an update about the court case once it ends, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the comment section there.